They said that entering the territory of the White Ghost was a death sentence. They whispered that the colossal saber-toothed tiger ruling those peaks forgave no trespassers, and that his fangs, long as ivory daggers, were built to shatter the skulls of mammoths. But on that night, when the hysterical, bone-chilling laughter of the giant hyenas surrounded the camp and cornered his little sister against the abyss, young Kale did the unthinkable. He didn't run away from the danger. He ran straight into the heart of it, straight for the beast's lair. Ignoring the screams of his kin and the survival instincts that had kept his species alive for generations, Kale climbed the forbidden slope. He carried no spear to defend himself. Instead, he carried a sliced palm, leaving a trail of fresh blood in the snow to attract the attention of the only predator in the forest capable of slaughtering the hyenas, the legendary Sabertooth. Now, he is alone in the crushing darkness of a frozen cave, on his knees, listening to the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the prehistoric beast approaching from the shadows behind him. Kale went there to make an impossible trade, his life for hers. But what he is about to discover in the amber eyes of that saber-toothed tiger will change the fate of his tribe forever. The king of the Ice Age is awake, and he does not like to be disturbed. The night did not fall upon the valley, it crushed it. The darkness of the Ice Age was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the chest, suffocating the weak. For the Clovis tribe, the fire was not just warmth, it was a weapon, a small, trembling circle of light holding back a world that wanted to eat them. But tonight, the fire was not enough. The warning didn't come from the sentries. It came from the wind. It carried a scent that made the dogs whimper and hide behind the tense smell of rotten marrow, old blood, and wet fur. And then, the sound. It wasn't the deep, chest-rattling roar of a bear, nor the sharp howl of a wolf. It was a giggle, a high-pitched, hysterical chatter that echoed off the frozen cliffs like the laughter of mad spirits. It was the sound of the bone crushers, the giant hyenas. They burst from the tree line like shadows detached from the earth. These were not the scavengers of modern times. These were titans of hunger, beasts with shoulders as high as a man's chest, jaws built to snap femurs like dry twigs. "Defend the circle," roared Torin, the clan leader, his voice cracking with a fear he tried to hide. Chaos erupted. The snow, once pristine and silent, was instantly churned into a slush of mud and blood. The sound was deafening, the sickening crunch of bone, the screams of the tribe, and that relentless, mocking laughter of the beasts. Kale, only 12 winters old, stood near the edge of the chaos, his knuckles white around a spear that suddenly felt like a toy. He saw Torin, the strongest warrior, thrust his obsidian-tipped spear into the shoulder of a matriarch hyena. The beast didn't even flinch. She simply snapped the wood with a twist of her massive neck and swatted the man aside as if he were a troublesome insect. The warriors were not fighting a battle. They were being culled. This wasn't war. It was feeding time. Kale froze. His eyes darted through the smoke, searching for one face. One small face. "Ella," he screamed, the cold air burning his throat. Through a gap in the fighting, he saw her. Ilara, his little sister, had been separated from the women. She was backing away towards the jagged rocks of the eastern ridge, her small knife trembling in her hand. But she wasn't alone. 3 of the smaller hyenas, still larger than wolves, had cut her off. They weren't attacking yet. They were circling. They were playing with their food. Kale surged forward, but a heavy hand grabbed his fur tunic, yanking him back. It was his uncle. "Run, boy, to the caves. She is gone. let me go. Kale fought, kicking and thrashing, but the grip was iron. Look at them, Kale, his uncle shouted, pointing at the slaughter. Our spears break against their hide. If you go there, you are just more meat. Survive. That is the only law left. Kale looked. He saw the futility. He saw the logic of survival. But then he looked back at the ridge. Alara tripped, falling into the snow, and the hyenas closed in, their laughter rising in pitch. The terror in her eyes wasn't just fear of death, it was the fear of being abandoned. Something primal snapped inside Kale's chest. It was a rejection of logic, a rejection of the cold math of survival that said the weak must be left behind. He broke free from his uncle's grip, but he didn't run towards Ilara. He knew his uncle was right. He couldn't kill 3 hyenas with a stick. He needed a weapon, not a spear, not a rock. He needed a weapon that breathed. He turned his back on the battle and looked toward the north, toward the Forbidden Ridge, the Black Peaks. The tribe spoke of the Black Peaks only in whispers. It was the domain of the White Ghost, a saber-toothed tiger so old and so massive that even the mammoths gave him a wide berth. The legends said he was a demon who collected the souls of men. They said he was death incarnate, perfect. Kale didn't think. He didn't plan. He let the instinct take the reins. If the hyenas were the chaotic evil of this world, then he needed the ancient, disciplined evil to stop them. He needed the king of the north. Where are you going? His uncle screamed, confused by the boy's retreat into the dark. That is the beast's land. You seek death. I seek a trade, Kale whispered to the wind. Though no one heard him, he sprinted into the darkness. The sounds of the massacre faded slightly behind him, replaced by the deafening silence of the deep forest. The cold here was different. It was sharper, older. Every step was a gamble. The snow was deeper, threatening to swallow his legs, but he pushed on, his lungs burning as if he had swallowed fire. He wasn't running away from the monsters. He was running toward the monster. The trees grew thicker, twisting like skeletal fingers in the moonlight. He could feel eyes on him. Not the frantic, hungry eyes of the hyenas, but something else, a heavy, watching presence. The silence of this place was heavy, a suffocating blanket that warned all living things to turn back. This was not the land of men. This was a church of bone and blood, and he was trespassing. Kale reached the base of the rocky incline that led to the tiger's lair. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked back one last time. From this height, he could see the fires of his camp burning low, consumed by the shadows of the pack. He could still hear the faint, mocking laughter of the hyenas echoing up the valley walls. They were taking their time with Alara. That was their mistake. They were arrogant. Kale gripped his obsidian knife. He didn't raise it to defend himself. He pressed the sharp volcanic glass against his own palm. He sliced. Hot blood dripped onto the pristine white snow. Steam rose from the wound. Ideally, you hide your scent from a predator. Tonight, Kale needed to scream his presence. He needed to wake the dragon. Come out, he gasped, his breath misting in the freezing air. I am here. He turned and ran deeper into the mouth of the ravine, leaving a trail of red breadcrumbs for the ultimate hunter. He was no longer a boy, he was bait, and he was praying that the legend was hungry.
If you believe that these ancient giants were more than just monsters, that they had souls, loyalty, and stories waiting to be told, subscribe to the channel. Let's bring the Ice Age back to life together. And tell me in the comments below, from what territory in the world are you watching this legend unfold?
The ravine was a wound in the earth, a jagged tear between two cliffs where the moonlight struggled to reach. As Cale crossed the threshold, the wind died. The screaming of his tribe and the maniacal cackling of the hyenas faded into a dull thrum, swallowed by the sheer mass of the stone walls. Here the air was still. It tasted of old ice, copper, and something muskier, the heavy, undeniable scent of an apex predator. Cale didn't stop running, but his pace slowed. His legs felt like lead, sinking into snow that was deeper here, untouched by the sun. Every breath was a shard of glass in his lungs. He held his cut hand out to the side, flicking his wrist with every few steps. Bright crimson droplets splashed against the blue-white snow or breadcrumb trail of life for death to follow. He was trespassing in a world that belonged to the ghosts of the Pleistocene, a place where humans were not hunters but intruders. The stories of the elders flooded his mind, unbidden. They spoke of the white ghost not as an animal but as a curse. They said this tiger had survived the great freeze that killed his kin, that he had eaten the hearts of bears and crushed the skulls of wolves. He was a relic, a leftover from a time when the monsters were bigger and the nights were darker. Cale wasn't just walking into a cave, he was walking into a legend. And legends, he knew, required blood. The terrain changed. The snow gave way to a floor of frozen mud and debris. Cale's boot crunched down on something brittle. He looked down. It was a ribcage, massive, curved, and picked clean. Further ahead, the skull of a cave lion sat half buried in the dirt, its empty sockets staring accusingly at him. This was the sanctuary of bones. This was the trophy room of a king who had no subjects, only victims. Fear, cold and liquid, filled Cale's stomach. His instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run back to the hyenas. At least with the hyenas, death would be loud and fast. Here, death felt slow. It felt like it was watching him. He reached the mouth of the main cavern. It was a gaping maw of darkness, breathing out a rhythmic draft of warm, foul air. Cale stopped. He was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the sheer, crushing aura of the place. He squeezed his hand, forcing more blood to flow, the pain sharpening his focus. "I am here," he whispered again, the sound vanishing instantly into the void. Then the darkness shifted. It wasn't a movement he saw. It was a movement he felt. The shadows at the back of the cave seemed to detach themselves from the rock. Two orbs of burning amber ignited in the gloom, eyes that didn't blink, eyes that held no warmth, only a calculating, ancient intelligence. A low sound began to vibrate through the floor, traveling up through the soles of Cale's boots. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr, but so deep and heavy it felt like the earth itself was grinding its teeth. The white ghost emerged. He was colossal, a mountain of muscle moving with the impossible fluidity of water. His coat was pale, nearly white, designed to vanish in the blizzards, but marked with scars that told the history of 1,000 fights. But it was the fangs that froze Cale's heart to curved daggers of ivory. Long as a man's forearm, extending past the beast's lower jaw, they were weapons designed by nature for one purpose: to sever the spine of giants. The tiger stopped 10 paces away. He lowered his massive head, sniffing the air. He smelled the boy. He smelled the terror. But mostly, he smelled the fresh blood dripping from Cale's hand. The beast took a step forward, his paws making no sound. He was curious, a human child, alone, bleeding, standing in the heart of his domain. It broke every rule of the wild. Prey runs. Prey hides. Prey does not offer itself. Kale's knees buckled. He didn't try to run. He knew he couldn't outrun the wind. Instead, he did the only thing that might confuse the instinct of a killer. He dropped to his knees in the frozen mud. He took his spear, his only protection, and laid it on the ground beside him. Then he tilted his head back, exposing the soft, vulnerable flesh of his throat to the monster. It was a gamble of absolute madness. He was betting on the idea that this creature was not a mindless eating machine, but a soul capable of curiosity. He was betting on the noble beast the legends whispered about, the one that killed for dominance, not for sport. The tiger froze. The low rumble in his chest hitched. The beast loomed over the boy, close enough that Cale could smell the raw meat on his breath and feel the heat radiating from his massive body. The saber teeth were inches from Cale's face. Cale closed his eyes, tears freezing on his cheeks. He waited for the bite. He waited for the end, but the bite did not come. Instead, a rough, wet nose pressed against his neck, inhaling deeply. The beast was reading him. He was tasting the air, analyzing the boy's chemicals. He smelled the fear, yes, but underneath the fear, he smelled something else. He smelled the smoke of the burning village. He smelled the distant, rot-filled scent of the hyenas carried on the boy's clothes. The tiger pulled back slightly, letting out a sharp chuff of breath that blew Cale's hair back. The beast didn't strike. He turned his head toward the cave entrance, his ears twitching. He had caught the scent on the wind, the scent of the invaders, the scent of the laughing devils who dared to hunt in the King's Valley. Cale opened his eyes. The tiger wasn't looking at him anymore. The amber eyes were fixed on the valley below, narrowing into slits of cold, focused fury. The boy was no longer the most interesting thing in the cave. The insult to the tiger's territory was.
Before we continue to the outcome, I have a sincere request. Producing these stories, writing the scripts, and creating these specific visuals takes days of hard work and dedication. If you are enjoying this video and value the effort I put into this channel, please subscribe right now. It is the best way to help me keep creating high-quality content for you. Thank you for your support.
The cave held its breath. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy with a decision that hung in the balance between life and death. Cale remained on his knees, his neck exposed, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The great white tiger, the ghost of the north, stood over him, a statue carved from muscle and ancient ice. But the death blow did not come. Instead, the beast lifted his massive head, turning away from the boy's trembling form. His nostrils flared, dragging in the cold air. To Cale, the wind smelled only of snow and distant smoke, but to the tiger, the wind was a tapestry of information. He smelled the invasive musk of the hyenas, a scent of rot and disrespect that polluted the crisp purity of his mountain. The laughing devils were not just hunting, they were trespassing. Cale saw the change in the amber eyes. The predatory hunger that had been focused on him vanished, replaced by a cold, territorial arrogance. The tiger let out a sound that was less a growl and more a vibration, a deep thrumming that rattled the loose stones on the cavern floor. It was the sound of a king who had found thieves in his throne room. Slowly, carefully, Cale pulled his hands from the freezing mud. He didn't stand up, not yet. He didn't want to challenge the beast's height. Instead, he pointed, his bloody hand extended toward the mouth of the cave, pointing down into the valley, toward the distant, echoing screams of his sister. "Take them," Kale whispered, his voice cracking. "They are yours." The tiger didn't understand the words. He didn't know what his sister was, nor did he care about human tragedy. But he understood the intent. He understood the direction. The boy was not fighting. He was submitting. And in the logic of the wild, a submitting creature is of no consequence when a challenger is roaring at the gates. The beast moved. It was a terrifying display of power. The tiger stepped over Kale, his massive paws sinking silently into the dirt. His tail twitched, whipping the air with agitation. He ignored the boy completely now, dismissing him as one might dismiss a stone or a tree. The tiger walked to the edge of the ravine and looked down. Below, the valley was a chaotic smear of firelight and shadows. The wind carried the high-pitched yipping of the hyena paka sound that grated against the tiger's ears. In the Pleistocene, the sabertooth and the hyena were ancient enemies. One was a solitary assassin, a creature of precision and ambush. The other was a mob of chaos, a swarm that overwhelmed through sheer numbers and cruelty. The tiger bared his fangs, a silent snarl that exposed gums black as coal. He wasn't going down there to save a girl. He was going down there to slaughter the competition. Kale scrambled to his feet, grabbing his spear. The adrenaline that had frozen him was now thawing into a desperate need for action. He watched the tiger bunch his hind muscles. The beast was preparing to descend. "Wait," Kale gasped, though he didn't know why. The tiger didn't wait. With a burst of speed that blurred the eye, the massive cat launched himself from the ledge. He didn't run, he flowed. He bounded down the treacherous icy rocks with a grace that defied his immense bulk, a white shadow merging with the snow. Kale didn't hesitate. He ran after the beast. The descent was a nightmare. Kale slipped and stumbled, his human limbs clumsy compared to the perfect engineering of the feline. He slid down a slope of shale, tearing his tunic, bruising his skin against the ice. But he kept his eyes on the white shape ahead. The tiger was moving fast, but he paused at the tree line, rubbing his flank against a massive pine, marking it, reclaiming it. Kale caught up, gasping for air, his chest burning. He stopped 10 yards behind the tiger. For a moment, just a fleeting heartbeat, the beast looked back. The amber eyes met the human's blue ones. There was no warmth there, no Disney-like understanding. There was only a grim acknowledgement. "You are following. Do not get in my way." They moved together now, a strange, impossible pair cutting through the frozen forest. The boy, driven by love and fear. The beast, driven by pride and instinct. The sound of the hyenas grew louder, a cacophony of shrieks and snaps that made the hair on Kale's arms stand up. They were close. They reached the edge of the clearing, near the cliffside. Kale dropped low, hiding behind a fallen log. The tiger did not hide. He stepped into the moonlight, his white coat glowing against the darkness. Below them, on the narrow ledge, the nightmare was playing out. The hyenas had cornered Elara. They were taking turns, snapping at her, nipping her legs, enjoying the terror of the small human. The matriarch of the pack, a scarred beast with one ear missing, was moving in for the kill, saliva dripping from her jaws. Kale gripped his spear, his knuckles white. He wanted to scream, to warn her, but he knew that would only trigger the attack. He looked at the tiger. The beast was perfectly still. His muscles were coiled tight, storing potential energy like a drawn bowstring. The wind shifted, blowing from the tiger toward the hyenas. The matriarch hyena stopped. Her head snapped up, her nose twitched. The laughter of the pack died instantly. replaced by a confused, fearful silence. They smelled it, the scent of a ghost, the scent of death. The tiger didn't roar. He didn't announce himself. He simply exhaled, a cloud of steam rising from his jaws, and stepped off the ledge, beginning the charge. The silence of the pact was over. The violence was about to begin. Kale watched, his heart in his throat, knowing that the only thing standing between his sister and oblivion was the monster he had unleashed upon the world. The enemy of his enemy had arrived. Gravity seemed to suspend for a heartbeat. The white ghost hung in the air, a suspended avalanche of muscle and fury, silhouetted against the indifferent moon. Then gravity reclaimed him. The impact was cataclysmic. The tiger didn't just land. He collided with the earth like a meteor. He crashed directly into the center of the pack, his massive paws pinning a mid-sized hyena into the snow with a sickening crunch that was felt rather than heard. The beast didn't even have time to yelp before the life was crushed out of it. Chaos exploded. The orderly circle of torment the hyenas had built around the girl shattered instantly. The air, once filled with mocking laughter, was now torn apart by the guttural, chest-vibrating roars of the Pleistocene king. This was not the defensive snarl of a cornered animal. This was the offensive thunder of a war machine. Kale didn't watch the fight. He used the explosion of violence as his cover. While every yellow eye was turned toward the white monster in their midst, Kale slid down the shale slope, ignoring the sharp rocks slicing his palms. "Ilara," he screamed, his voice barely cutting through the din. The girl was pressed against the cliff wall, her eyes wide, reflecting the carnage. She was frozen, her mind unable to process that the monster from the ghost stories was currently tearing apart the monsters from her nightmares. The tiger was a blur of motion. He was outnumbered 12-1, but in the tight confines of the ledge, numbers were a liability. The hyenas tripped over each other, snapping frantically. One brazen male lunged for the tiger's flank, his bone-crushing jaws seeking a hamstring. The tiger didn't turn. He simply lashed out with a hind leg, his claws raking the attacker's face, sending the hyena spinning away with a howl of agony. But the hyenas were survivors. They were the bone crushers for a reason. They realized quickly that the tiger couldn't bite them all at once. The matriarch barked a sharp staccato command. The pack split. Half surged toward the tiger, swarming him like army ants, biting at his legs and tail. The other half turned back to the easy meat. They turned back to a... Kale hit the bottom of the slope just as two hyenas lunged for his sister. He didn't have the strength to kill them, but he had momentum. He slammed his shoulder into the nearest beast, knocking it off balance on the slick ice. It was like hitting a wall of solid muscle. The hyena snarled, snapping at the air inches from Kale's face, its breath hot and reeking of carrion. "Get back." Kale swung his spear wildly, the obsidian tip catching the creature's snout. It recoiled, sneezing blood, but its partner was circling behind him. Kale grabbed Ilara's arm, hauling her up. "Move to the crevice." They scrambled toward a narrow fissure in the rock wall, too small for the hyenas, just big enough for children. But they were too slow. The second hyena clamped its jaws onto the edge of Kale's tunic, jerking him back. Kale hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. The beast loomed over him, drool falling onto his face, ready to finish the kill. Then a shadow eclipsed the moon. The tiger had seen the movement. Or perhaps he had sensed the shift in the battle's rhythm. He had thrown off the swarm, clinging to his back with a violent shudder, and launched himself again. He didn't roar this time. He struck with the silent efficiency of an executioner. One of his massive paws, heavy as a sledgehammer and tipped with knives, swiped the hyena off Kale. The force of the blow sent the scavenger tumbling through the air, off the ledge, and into the dark abyss below. Kale scrambled backward, pulling Ilara with him, pressing their backs against the cold stone. They were now in the eye of the storm. The tiger stood between them and the pack. He was breathing heavily now, his white coat stained with crimson, some of it his, most of it theirs. He was bleeding from a dozen nips on his legs, but his stance was unbroken. The matriarch stepped forward. She was the only one left who wasn't cowering. She was huge, scarred, and desperate. She knew that if she retreated now, her authority was gone. She locked eyes with the tiger. It was a stare-down of millions of years of evolution, the pack versus the solitary hunter. She lunged. It was a fast, desperate strike, aimed at the tiger's throat. But the tiger had fought bears. He had fought lions. He had fought the winter itself. He didn't dodge. He accepted the hit, taking the matriarch's weight on his shoulder, and then he buried his fangs. The daggers of ivory sank deep into the back of the matriarch's neck. The sound was wet and final. The tiger clamped down, his jaw muscles bulging, and with a violent twist of his massive neck, he snapped the matriarch's spine. He dropped her body into the snow with a thud that shook the ledge. Silence rushed back into the valley, louder than the noise had been. The remaining hyenas looked at their fallen leader, then at the white demon standing over her. The spell of the mob was broken. Their arrogance evaporated, replaced by the instinct to survive. One by one, they turned and ran. They didn't retreat in order. They routed, yelping and scrambling over each other to escape the reach of the king. Kale clutched Ilara, both of them shivering violently. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the cold terror of reality. The hyenas were gone, but the tiger remained. The beast stood panting, his sides heaving. He licked a wound on his foreleg, the rough tongue rasping over fur. Then, slowly, he turned his head. The amber eyes found the children. He took a step toward them. Kale raised his spear instinctively, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold it. "No," Ilara whispered, pushing the spear down. "Look." The tiger wasn't in a hunting crouch. His ears were forward. He looked at the children, then looked at the dead matriarch, and then back to the darkness of the forest. He let out a soft chuffa sound of dismissal. The debt was paid. The intruders were dead. The king of the north had reclaimed his throne, and in the brutal logic of the Ice Age, the enemy of his enemy had been allowed to live, for now. The valley was silent. It was a heavy, ringing silence that follows the roar of a storm. The snow, once white and pure, was now a tapestry of violence, painted in broad strokes of crimson and churned mud. The body of the hyena matriarch lay twisted at the edge of the precipice, a broken monument to the price of arrogance. Standing over her was the white ghost, the king. He was a terrifying sight. His chest heaved like a bellows, pumping clouds of steam into the freezing air. His white coat was matted with blood-dark, thick blood that didn't belong to him. He didn't look triumphant. He looked bored. To a creature this ancient, violence wasn't an event. It was simply a chore, like clearing snow from a den. Kale stood frozen, his arm wrapped tight around Ilara's trembling shoulders. The adrenaline that had fueled his madness was draining away, leaving behind a cold clarity. He was standing 5 feet from the apex predator of the Pleistocene. The pact was over. The common enemy was dead. The tiger turned his head. The massive neck muscles rippled under the fur. He looked at the dead hyena, then he looked at Cale. The boy stopped breathing. This was the moment. The switch in a predator's brain could flip instantly. Cale gripped his small obsidian knife, knowing it was as useless as a blade of grass against a mountain. But the tiger didn't crouch. His ears weren't pinned back in aggression. They were swiveled forward, listening to the wind. He took a step toward the children. Ilara buried her face in Cale's tunic, sobbing quietly. Cale didn't flinch. He owed this beast his life. If the payment was death, he would stand tall. The tiger stopped. He leaned forward, his great head lowering until it was level with Cale's chest. The smell of him was overwhelming: musk, iron, and old ice. The beast let out a long, shuddering breath, blowing hot air against Cale's face. It wasn't a sniff of hunger. It was an acknowledgement. The beast was memorizing the scent of the only human who had ever run toward him instead of away. Cale. The scream shattered the moment. It came from the ridge above. Torches flickered in the tree line like angry fireflies. The warriors of the Clovis tribe poured down the slope, sliding and stumbling in their haste. Torin, the uncle, was in the lead, his face a mask of grief and rage. They expected to find corpses. They expected to find hyenas feasting on children. Instead, they saw the nightmare. They saw Cale and Ilara standing in the shadow of the white ghost. "The devil," Torin roared, raising a heavy spear. "Kill it. Save them." The tiger's demeanor changed instantly. The calm vanished. His lips pulled back, revealing the blood-stained sabers. A growl started in his stomach, a low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the soles of everyone's boots. He turned to face the new threat. He was tired, he was wounded, but he was ready to kill again. No, the shout didn't come from the warriors. It came from the prey. Cale stepped away from the safety of the rock wall. He didn't run to his uncle. He ran to the middle. He placed himself directly in the line of fire, spreading his arms wide, turning his back to the tiger, and facing his own people. "Stop," Cale screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. "Do not throw." Torin skidded to a halt, the spear trembling in his hand. The other warriors froze, confused by the tableau. A boy protecting a monster. It defied every instinct, every lesson, every scar the tribe carried. "Move, boy," Torin shouted, his eyes wide with panic. "It will tear you apart. It has tasted blood. It tasted the blood of our enemies." Cale pointed to the carcass of the hyena matriarch. "He saved her. He saved us." The warriors looked at the dead hyena, then back at the tiger. The beast was towering over Cale, close enough to snap the boy's neck with a casual bite. But the tiger wasn't attacking. He was watching the humans with a look of supreme, bored indifference. He knew he could kill them. The fact that he wasn't doing it was a display of power far greater than violence. Cale looked back over his shoulder. He looked into the amber eyes of the king. There was no fear left in the boy's heart, only a profound, aching gratitude. "Go," Cale whispered to the beast. "Go, before they forget their fear." The tiger blinked. He let out a chuffer, short, sharp exhalation through his nose. It was almost a laugh. He looked at the warriors one last time, engraving their faces into his memory, and then he turned. He didn't run. A king does not run. He walked. He moved past the children, brushing his flank against Cale's shoulder, a touch that was solid, warm, and heavy with meaning. He padded toward the deep forest, his massive paws making no sound on the snow. He walked through the beam of moonlight and melted into the shadows of the tree line, vanishing as if he had been made of mist all along. The tribe stood in silence for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of torches and the wind whistling through the ravine. Torin lowered his spear. He walked slowly to Kale, grabbing the boy by the shoulders, checking him for wounds. He looked at Ilara, unharmed, save for her terror. Then, the old warrior looked at the tracks in the snow. The massive prints of the tiger were right next to the small boot prints of the boy. They walked together. "I thought the legends were lies," Torin whispered, his voice hushed with reverence. "I thought he was a demon." Kale looked at the empty forest, where the darkness stared back. He touched the spot on his chest where the tiger's breath had warmed him. "He is not a demon," Kale said softly, "and he is not a pet. He is the storm that breaks the other storms." Years would pass. The fires of the Clovis people would burn down and be rebuilt. Kale would grow into a man, a leader with scars on his hands and silver in his hair. The story would be told 1,000 times the night the boy ran to the beast. They stopped calling the creature the white ghost or the man-eater. From that night on, when the winter wind howled and the wolves scratched at the tents, the elders would tell the children not to be afraid. They would tell them that the valley had a guardian. They would tell them that as long as they honored the wild, the king of the north was watching. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the moon was full and the hyenas dared to laugh in the distance, a roar would echo from the black peaks, a sound of earth-shaking power that silenced the world. Kale would smile by the fire, knowing that his friend was still out there. Loyalty, he learned, was the only fire that the ice could never extinguish.
And so, the legend of the Guardian comes to a close. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of the bond between the boy and the beast? If this story of loyalty and survival resonated with you, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the next tale. And write your honest opinion in the comments below. I read every single one. See you in the next video.